Ever get the urge to, like, throw something on the grill and be like, yo, this one's for the big guy upstairs?
Right.
Me neither, but that was apparently a thing back in the day.
Yeah.
We're diving into your Leviticus excerpts today.
Okay.
Specifically, all those fascinating details about different types of offerings.
It's true. Those ancient Israelites took their barbecues very seriously. But it wasn't just about grilling for the gods. Leviticus paints a vivid picture of a whole system of offerings, each with its own unique purpose.
Okay, so we're talking burnt offerings, meal offerings, peace offerings. It's like a whole menu of options.
It is, yeah.
What was the thought process behind all these different types?
You can think of it as a way of communicating with God. Each offering had a specific message, a way of expressing devotion, seeking forgiveness, or marking a special occasion, and they were incredibly detail-oriented.
Details.
Mhm.
Leviticus seems to be all about the details. And speaking of details, one that really jumps out is that whole emphasis on blemish-free offerings. Now, I appreciate a good quality steak as much as the next person, but why all the fuss about physical perfection in sacrifices?
It's a fascinating point, isn't it? And it might seem a bit superficial at first, but it actually points to a deeper idea. You wouldn't offer something damaged or imperfect to someone you deeply respected, right?
Yeah.
It's about giving your best, your very best, as a sign of honor and reverence.
That makes sense. It's like showing up to a job interview in sweatpants, not exactly sending the right message.
Haha, exactly.
So giving your best, even in ancient times.
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to meal offerings. What were those all about? I'm picturing something a little less, well, fiery than burnt offerings.
Yeah, if only less dramatic than a whole animal going up in flames.
Mm-hmm.
Meal offerings were more about sustenance and gratitude. Think finely crafted cakes, wafers, grain, all made with the good stuff, fine flour, oil, sometimes even frankincense.
Now, that's what I call a proper offering. Did they at least get to, taste test those offerings before presenting them, for quality control?
Uh-huh. I admire your dedication to deliciousness, but no, they wouldn't have taste tested those. A portion was burned on the altar as a gift to God. And here's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
The rest actually went to the priests.
Uh-huh. So that's how the priests got their cut. It all makes sense now. It wasn't just about divine communication. It was about keeping the religious wheels turning, right?
Precisely. The priests played a central role in these rituals, and their sustenance came from those offerings. It highlights their importance in maintaining that connection between the people and the divine.
Okay, so we've got offerings for devotion, offerings for sustenance. What about celebrations? That's where those peace offerings come in, right?
You got it. Peace offerings were the life of the party, celebrating a special occasion, giving thanks, or even sealing a covenant. And these were the only offerings where the person making the offering actually got to partake in eating the sacrifice along with the priests.
Talk about a communal dining experience. It must have been quite a sight, everyone gathered around after the sacrifice, sharing a meal and feeling that connection to each other and to the divine. But Leviticus isn't all sunshine and celebratory feasts, is it? We still have those sin offerings and trespass offerings to unpack. Those sound a bit more, shall we say, intense.
Speaking of intense, Leviticus is famous, or maybe infamous, for those purity codes.
Yeah.
It's a whole other level of do's and don'ts.
It is.
But is it all just about, physical cleanliness, or are we missing a deeper layer here?
You're hitting on a key point.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in the specifics. Don't eat this, don't touch that. But those purity codes,
Right.
like the offerings, point to something much bigger.
Okay, so walk me through it.
Sure.
What kind of things were considered clean and unclean in the world of Leviticus? Well, you've got your categories of clean and unclean animals,
Right.
for starters.
Right.
Leviticus gets very specific about which land animals are okay to eat. Those that both chew the cud and have split hooves.
So that's why cows are a go, but pigs are a no-go.
Exactly.
I knew those ancient dietary restrictions had to have some logic behind them.
Exactly, and it goes beyond just food.
Okay.
Leviticus also covers things like bodily discharges, skin diseases, even the rituals for purification after childbirth or contact with a dead body.
Wow, they really covered all the bases, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
But you mentioned deeper layers.
Yes.
What's the bigger picture here? Why were these specific things considered unclean?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Clean and unclean weren't just about hygiene.
Okay.
They had symbolic, spiritual, and even social implications.
Uh-huh.
Cleanness was about wholeness, alignment with God's order, being part of the community and religious life. Uncleanness, on the other hand, represented disruption, disorder, a kind of temporary separation from that sacred space.
So it's not just about avoiding germs, it's about maintaining a sense of order, holiness, and belonging within the community.
You got it.
Yeah.
Imagine how these codes influenced daily life for the Israelites.
Right.
What they ate, how they dealt with illness, even how they mourned everything was guided by these rules.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate how deeply intertwined their religious beliefs were with every aspect of their lives.
It's true.
But some of those rules still seem, well, a little random to our modern sensibilities. Like,
Yeah.
why pigs specifically?
Right.
What made them the poster child for uncleanliness?
That's a question that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Theories range from the pig's diet to its association with certain pagan practices, to even its lack of practical use in that environment. Remember, Leviticus wasn't just a theoretical document.
Right.
It was about real people living in a specific time and place.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget the historical and cultural context.
It is.
Okay, last question on these purity codes.
Okay.
Leviticus is also big on those specific numbers of days for purification rituals.
Yeah.
7 days here, 33 days there. What's the deal with all the number crunching?
Those numbers probably weren't arbitrary. Numbers often hold symbolic significance in the Bible.
Right.
7, for example, is frequently associated with completeness or perfection. So those specific time frames might have represented a gradual process of reintegration back into a state of cleanness and community after a period of separation.
Like a spiritual countdown timer.
Uh-huh. There you go.
You're right. It makes more sense when you think of it as a journey,
Yeah.
a process of returning to a state of wholeness and connection.
Right.
So if we pull back from the specifics, it seems like these purity codes weren't just about arbitrary rules.
Right.
They were a way to express deeper truths about holiness, order, and the relationship between the individual and the community.
Exactly. It is a framework for understanding their place in the world, both in relation to God and to each other.
Which brings us to that central theme that seems to be woven throughout Leviticus, holiness. We've touched on it indirectly, but what did it actually mean to be holy in this context? So we've covered offerings, we talked about those purity codes, and now we're getting to like the heart of Leviticus, this whole idea of holiness.
Yeah.
It feels like everything in this book kind of circles back to that concept, but
Yeah.
what did it actually mean to be like holy in that ancient Israelite context?
It's a big question, and Leviticus offers some intriguing answers.
Right.
You're right, it's not just a side note. It's central to their whole worldview.
Yeah.
Holiness, in this context, goes beyond just being, like, a good person, right?
Right.
It's about being set apart, dedicated to God, reflecting God's character in everything you do.
And Leviticus does not let you forget it. That
Right.
phrase, I am the Lord your God. It's practically a mantra throughout the book. Why all the repetition? Were they worried about people, like, forgetting who they were talking to?
I like to think of it as a grounding statement,
Okay.
a constant reminder.
Yeah.
It's the foundation for everything else in Leviticus.
Right.
It emphasizes their unique relationship with God. The God who liberated them, who provides for them, who calls them to a higher standard. Imagine hearing that phrase woven into every aspect of your life, a constant call to remember who you are and to whom you belong.
It's almost like a built-in accountability partner.
Right.
But Leviticus doesn't just, talk about holiness in this abstract way, right?
It does.
It lays out very specific instructions for how to live a holy life, both as individuals and as a whole community.
Absolutely. And that's where those laws and rituals we've been discussing come in the offerings, the purity codes.
Right.
They weren't just random rules. They were a practical guide to living out that holiness.
Yeah.
They provided a tangible way to express devotion, to seek forgiveness, to maintain order, to draw closer to God.
It's like they had like a holiness handbook,
Right.
a blueprint for living in right relationship with God and with each other.
I like that, yeah.
But Leviticus also has those cautionary tales,
Yeah.
stories that show what happens when those rules are broken.
Yeah.
Like that story of Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, offering up strange fire before the Lord. That one always makes me think twice about lighting those scented candles. I'm like, whoa, gotta make sure this is like ritualistically approved.
Exactly.
But seriously, it makes you realize that holiness for them wasn't just about good intentions.
Right.
It was about meticulous action, following those rituals with precision.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we even begin to translate that for today?
Right.
We're not expected to start sacrificing bulls in our backyards, are we?
Definitely not. But even though we might not follow those specific rituals today,
Right.
The core message of Leviticus about relationship, purity, and holiness still resonates.
Hmm.
It challenges us to live more intentionally, to align our actions with our values, and to consider how our choices impact both ourselves and others.
So what are some concrete examples?
Yeah.
What can we actually take away from Leviticus and apply to our modern lives, even if we don't follow those exact rules?
One of the most powerful takeaways is the emphasis on compassion and justice, especially towards the vulnerable.
Okay.
Think about that passage in Leviticus 19 about leaving the corners of your fields unharvested for the poor and the stranger.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's a beautiful example of social responsibility woven right into their religious practices.
Right. It's not just about personal piety.
Exactly.
It's about caring for those in need.
Yes.
And Leviticus doesn't shy away from those big systemic issues either, like those instructions about land ownership and the Jubilee years.
Absolutely. That concept of a Jubilee year every 50 years, a time for debt forgiveness, returning ancestral lands, a complete societal reset, that's a radical idea, even today.
It is.
It makes you question our own systems and structures,
Right.
whether they truly promote justice and equity for everyone.
It's a powerful reminder that holiness isn't just about our individual action,
It's bigger than this.
but also about creating a more just and compassionate society.
Absolutely.
So even though Leviticus might seem like this, ancient rule-bound text, it's so much more than that.
It really is.
It's a guide to living a life of meaning, purpose, and responsibility, both towards God and towards our, fellow human beings.
Beautifully said.
Well, thank you.
And it invites us to reflect on our own lives. What resonates with us from Leviticus?
Right.
What challenges us? And how can its message inspire us to live with greater intention, ethics, and compassion in the world today?
Those are definitely questions worth pondering. And on that note, we'll leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on. Leviticus emphasizes the importance of community in pursuing holiness. How do our social structures today, the way we live, work, interact, either support or hinder that pursuit? What can we learn from those ancient Israelites about the interconnectedness of ritual, ethics, and social responsibility? Until next time, keep diving deep,